This one is going to be massive as we are talking about all the products that ZOWIE has released in 2022. The video will be segmented into 3 parts, and firstly we'll go through the ZOWIE GSR SE Rouge review. Then we will talk about all the improvements that ZOWIE has made with the C-series mice, including why they already made version 2 of those C-series mice as well. And lastly we will go through on what's the situation with their mice, which ones I can still recommend and which ones might have higher tier and maybe even wireless competitors. Let's start. The ZOWIE GSR SE Rouge is basically the newest iteration of the GSR SE, and it's a slightly smoother and faster GSR SE. When comparing those two, I think what ZOWIE states on their website is pretty much exactly the case. The new GSR SE has a tiny bit less dynamic friction, meaning that it's a little bit harder for you to stop moving your mouse, and at the same time it's also easier for you to start moving your mouse. So there is a tiny bit less static friction and the mousepad feels smoother overall, but they still feel quite similar, which is why I understand that this wasn't called a version 2 or anything like that. But when I compare the GSR SE Rouge and the ZOWIE C PA, these are actually very similar. The GSR SE Rouge might be slightly smoother and it might have a little bit more dynamic friction as well, but I'm pretty confident that I could not tell the difference in a blind test. If you haven't seen my ZOWIE C PA reviews, this mousepad and surface is in my opinion very good for tracking based games, and it's also quite optimal for flicks and precision, but it's not really a ZOWIE GSR or a mud pad by any means. I've actually started to enjoy these smooth pads that are fairly fast but still provide some stopping power, as these are very good all-around pads in my opinion. I perform very well with the GSR SE Rouge in CSGO, and I also enjoy it a lot on Apex, and with the ZOWIE C PA it's one of my #1 choices for that game. Other than the surface changes, ZOWIE also states that the mousepad is now more durable and more humid resistant. It's pretty much impossible for me to confirm that it's more resistant to humidity though, as in my environment I don't really struggle with humidity issues, especially as I use a sports sleeve. But it does feel more consistent than the GSR SE, and as the surface feels pretty much the same as the PA, you can expect it to have the same kind of changes, which means it will be more durable than the GSR SE. Otherwise, in terms of features, it will feel very familiar to your previous GSR SE owners. It has that very consistent high density rubber base, so there are no bumps and the mousepad feels extremely flat. It also sticks to my desk very well, so the mousepad does not move at all even when I try to force it. There is no stitching whatsoever, but I've never had any issues with fraying on any of these ZOWIE or ZOWIE C pads. I did enjoy using the pad, but with it I do want some additional mobility from either faster mouse feet or to smaller and more lightweight mice. Like in this clip I'm using the Extra M42 wireless, which is a fairly small mouse, fairly lightweight, provides good mobility and fast PTV feet. My precision was on point and I was hitting nice flick shots. Then again with ZOWIE mice and the ZOWIE stock feet, I just feel a tad too slow on this GSR SE Rouge. Overall it's definitely a good mousepad, but what it comes down to is how durable it actually is. I've used it for about 2 to 3 weeks without any issues. I always play with a sports sleeve, so I did not have any humidity issues, and the mousepad definitely hasn't burned down during this time. You can get it for cheaper than the ZOWIE C PA, as you can probably get this with free shipping from Amazon and such. For example, for me the PA ends up costing about 45 euros with shipping, and I should be able to get a GSR SE for 35 euros locally or with free shipping. However, I do personally prefer the PA just a little bit, as it is a tiny bit faster, but the difference is very small and I'm not quite sure if the difference is worth that 10 euros. That's it for the GSR SE Rouge, and let's start talking about the C-series mice and what's the difference with the C-series version 1s and the version 2s or whatever we want to call them. Some of the initial C-series mice did struggle with disconnection issues, and ZOWIE did come up with a solution to that, so they did change the stress relief. It is now much longer than it was with the original C-series mice. There were also some initial build quality problems with the ZOWIE ZA and some of the very early EC2 models. The original ZA13-C did have some issues with the sides creaking. This was not present on all units, and I was pretty much ready to say that the updated ZA13-C would not have this issue at all, but there is this very specific spot that has some flex and causes a pop sound once you press. So the issue isn't as bad as it was before, and I doubt it will bother anyone in game. My first EC2 review sample had this tolerance issue on the edge of the side and the top shell, where there is a larger gap than on my newer samples. This I can feel in real use, and it definitely is irritating, but it seems to have been fixed ages ago. All in all, the new EC, FK and S-C series mice are very well built and feel very tanky and premium in hand. And to be honest, so does the ZA13-C. This issue is probably not happening on all units, and even if it was, you most likely won't even find it unless you're really looking for it. So let's talk about what makes the ZOWIE C series mice so special in my opinion. Well, there are those two massive upgrades, so there is the lighter weight and the much better cable. For example, the ZA13-C weighs about 10 grams less than the ZA13-B, and the S2-C is then again about 13 grams less, and the EC2-C is 17 grams less than the EC2-B. So the C series mice are quite a bit more lightweight, and you can clearly tell the difference with the ZA13, for example. The other massive and even more beneficial upgrade in my opinion is the cable, and the original ZOWIE C series cable is the best stock cable on the market for me. The new updated cable on the C series is not quite as good because the upward angle isn't as aggressive as it was before, but it still is a top tier cable for sure. There are a few things that ZOWIE has had going for them for ages, and one is for example the fact that they have pretty much a mouse for everybody. They have completely different shapes, and they also have different size options available for all of them. That combined with the fact that the in-hand feel of these ZOWIE mice is just exceptional, and there is pretty much nothing that competes apart from Logitech and ZOWIE and maybe LethalGamingGear in my opinion. What makes the in-hand feel so great and premium for ZOWIE is of course partly the coding, which is very creepy for me, and then of course the great build quality also serves a purpose, and lastly these shapes just feel so well designed and kind of finalized. For my 19x10cm hands and claw grip preference, there is pretty much nothing on any of these that I would absolutely want to change in terms of shape. Alright, and finally to the last segment of the video, so which of these ZOWIE mice is still competitive against today's market? So the CA series has pretty much no competition whatsoever. There are no clones and no mice that are directly copied from this shape. If you want more information about any of these shapes, check out the top right corner for the card. I've reviewed all of these shapes for at least twice, and I think you all are quite well aware of these. Moving on to the S2-C, and this has more competition and it's one of the most cloned mice on the market. But all the clones are basically OEM, and the shape is not a one-to-one clone, so it does not feel quite as finalized and the mice feel less premium overall. The best attempt is possibly the Fnatic Bolt, which is heavily inspired by the S2-C, but the quite aggressive front flare and the texture finish, which is very slippery for my skin type, ruins the mouse for me. And overall it just won't feel as high quality as the S2-C does. Then the FK2, and there are many mice that are inspired by this shape, one being the Extrafly M42, and one for example is the Razer Viper V2 Pro. The problem for the FK2 is that these two mice are so good that it's really hard for me to recommend that you should get the FK2 instead of one of these or any other clone. The shape is really good and I do prefer the FK2 shape much over the V2 Pro, but the M42 shape is even better for me than the FK2. It's just a little bit smaller overall, and it has more of a pronounced hump even with a flat back shell. I still enjoy using the FK2 quite a lot, but the M42 just goes and beats it at the moment. Then we got the EC2, which has very tough competition from the Pulsar X-Lite Wireless, which is an exact clone, but it's still not quite one-to-one to the EC2. It's a little bit larger and all the curves are not exactly the same, and the EC2 shape just feels better for me. The EC2 also feels more premium because of the coding. Both of these mice are very well built, but we of course have to consider the fact that the X-Lite version 2 is of course wireless, and these almost cost the exact same price. So overall it's hard to recommend the EC2 over the X-Lite version 2 wireless, but if we just talk about the in-hand feel and the shape and the quality, the ZOWIE takes the win here. It's kind of telling how good these guys are at designing mice, because the only one that can battle against the EC2 is the Outset AX, which is basically designed by the same guys who designed the EC2. It has been around for so many years and a lot of pro gamers are still using it. quite amazing to see, but basically the biggest difference with the EC2-C and the VAC C Outset AX is that the Outset AX is higher profile and it's quite a bit wider, but it's also shorter. And because it is shorter, it does not feel that much larger in hand than the EC2 does, but of course, you will have more palm contact with this hump. So to quickly conclude about the shapes and the competition and my favorite Zowie mice, the S2-C, the ZA13-C, and the EC2-C are still absolute bangers. The more I use the S2-C, the more I like it, which is quite funny because initially I didn't like the shape that much, and the ZA13-C then again has been one of my favorites for a long time. And lastly, the EC2-C with all its lovely curves is one of the mice that I've used the most over all the years that I've gamed. Don't forget that there are different size options for different people, but these three are the ones that are easiest to recommend for me. This one, the EC1, the ZA12 and the ZA11 are all very large, and I mostly recommend those for people who have large hands and like larger mice. The EC3 then again is a good option for those who enjoy small ergo or asymmetrical mice, but the EC2-C definitely isn't large, and I think it's a better bet for most of you guys who have medium or large hands. If you've never tried an asymmetrical mouse and you've mostly used small mice, the EC3-C might be easier for you to get used to, but I highly recommend for you to try and get used to the EC2-C. And overall, I for sure recommend for you to try some Zowie mice. There is the Zowie mouse fitting kit that should be available at least in the US and Europe, which might be good for you if you are not quite sure what you'd like. Also, if you want some more specific information about the Zowie mice, I'll link the video somewhere on the screen. That's pretty much it for this one. There are very few wired mice that I still can consider using. The only ones are pretty much from Zowie, VAC C and LethalGamingGear. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you enjoy my content, hit that subscribe button, and see you in the next one.